Hello and welcome to the Game Dev London podcast. I am your host, Oscar Clark, and this is a podcast for a community of amazing people who love to talk about and share their love about the details behind making games, whether or not they're actually based in London. So I'm, as I say, Oscar, I'm he, him pronouns, and I'm on a quest to understand everything you wanted to know about game dev, but never dared to ask. And I am delighted today to be joined by Roni, one of our other GDL host. Roni, how you doing? Nice to see you. So,
Hello.
do you want to tell everybody about yourself and what you do?
So I work in a recording studio, third party, and we record voiceover for video games.
Voiceover for video games. It's like it would be the perfect opportunity for somebody to teach me how to set up our podcast settings. And of course, as always, I managed to find ways to make mine not quite work right, but we got there in the end. So, Ronnie, thank you for helping me get ready to go. But let's talk about this because
Absolutely.
as a guy who's been involved in games for like 26 odd years, I've been a product owner, I've been a designer, I've been a lot of work on live ops, but I don't tend to get that involved in things like voice. In fact, in audio at all. And so I'm really keen to kind of learn a bit from you. So what is involved? I mean, I'm relying a little bit because I've done a couple of little voiceover kind of things in a little thing, so stupid stuff, mostly about my own ego, where there was a game that they built in PlayStation Home. I was home architect for PlayStation Home, the virtual world on PlayStation 3. They decided, because of an incident of me eating lobster, that we're going to make a game called Oscar's Lobster Mania. Yes, I kid you not. And I got to do the voiceover, obviously. So I've been the talent, for want of a better phrase, sitting there responding to the script and the kind of like the environment, blah 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 blah, to a certain extent. But what happens? How do you look at planning out how to get people's voices into a game?
Right, yeah, I guess, again, I just want to preface this though, by saying, there are people who have been in this industry way longer than I have.
That's
Um,
okay.
so
That's okay.
I'm just going off my own experience. So if I get anything wrong and people are like, "Oh, no, 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 no," it's just
There,
my own
there
experience.
are no wrong
Um,
answers in this dojo.
for sure. But yeah, so my understanding is, if the game dev wants voiceover in their game, um, they come to us and we ask the questions, what is the word count or line count, estimates, basically anything to help us plan ahead. Um, Word count and line count helps us understand the estimated hours taken to record. And so from there, we can then estimate everything else. Um, After they say okay, sounds good, to any prices, then we go into casting, which then we would require from the dev, any briefs, character briefs, like the description of the character, what they like to do, lines of said character that are really involved in the script, so it really shows what the character's like, as well as any images. Images are a huge thing. It helps you really nail and pinpoint like
A
who would
picture
fit
the
what.
person. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, the broad picture of it. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. Like for instance, if you don't tell us that it's a 90-year-old man and we cast someone who's 20 years old, it's not really gonna work.
Well,
So,
yeah, yeah.
yeah, yeah.
But just to
So
go back a little bit, just to kind of, because I think you hit I think there's something really important that came out of that first phrase you said, which is, if I'm a developer and I want to put voice into my game, I've got to have a really strong idea of the script before I start talking to you. And is
yeah,
that how often does that actually happen though? Because my understanding is that basically most of the games that I've seen happen, a lot of the time the narrative, although it's known to be important, often gets introduced quite late in terms of like the final kind of variation of it. It's often going through lots of iteration. um, I mean, this presumably is a huge challenge to get the script ready for that initial kind of voice process.
yeah. Um, I just thought of something while you're going off. But they oftentimes whenever we get especially newer people, because we work with a lot of indies, people who have never recorded voiceover for their games, They tend, and even people who are experienced, because the script is such a big thing to wrangle, and everyone wants to have it perfectly, and like, anyone in the creative arts will know that like you just like want to tweak it over and over, and there's it's never going to be
Oh,
final.
abs-
Um,
it's
so
done when it's torn from my cold dead hands.
Exactly, yeah.
Yeah.
So we often actually get people who we prefer to have a script a couple of days in advance, if not just 24 hours. But then
Mm,
we also have people who are just like, oh, I just want to tweak this one thing. I forgot this one thing. And we're like, that's fine. But we prefer like one thing to really note actually as well is that when you send a script off to be recorded, anything that you've sent to be recorded has to be locked, so you can't make changes of it on your side, because then obviously it gets very messy very quickly, especially if you're recording lots and lots and lots of
mm,
dialogue. I think in most cases, most developers that come to us to record things have a general idea of, if not estimated word count, at least the amount of like characters they'll need to record,
mm,
and how many people they want to play with each character.
mm. And
Um,
presumably, a
yeah,
lot of the kind of quote, I don't know what the word for it is, but it's all I imagine there's a bit like a B-roll element. So kind of additional phrases, additional kind of noises, reactions that you'd want to have available to have those kind of more improv, those that kind of bring the whole experience to life a little bit more. Is there a phrase for that?
yeah, they're called barks, which is funny
Barks.
because we get a lot of actors in who don't understand that term because either they're new or they've never encountered it before, and so
Yeah.
oftentimes us being very aware of what the word is, we'll be like, "All right, time to go to the barks," and then we'll be like, "What? You mean actually I'll be barking?" And you're like, "No, no, no, no,
Rough,
no, no,
rough.
no."
They're
Yeah,
rough cuts. Okay, maybe not.
yeah,
Sorry.
yeah,
Silly,
yeah.
silly. But yeah, I mean but to me that's an interesting thing because I think it's actually fairly. I mean, the one that always comes to my mind is the greasy. The squeaky wheel gets the grease, which is the classic line from Minsk in Baldur's Gate 2, and I've heard it so often I cannot take that out of my mind. And to me, these barks are kind of an integral part of understanding characterization, world, and so on and so forth. But if they become too much to latch onto in the brain, they can distract from the experience. So imagine getting that script right, massively important, but as you
Yeah.
say, a huge challenge.
Yeah. Well, that's why I think a lot of devs tend to go for a lot of different variations of those kinds of lines.
Mm-hmm.
So they'll often get, at least from us, multiple takes of a lot of the barks in each line.
Mm.
They'll be implementing in those situations, so they can kind of mess around with it.
Yeah, and one of the things about those, again, I pretend I've never done any of this stuff, but of course I've done little bits. One of the hardest things I've found is tone. So the delivery of the particular line sometime during the game, finishing the game off, you might end up changing some aspect, and now the tone that you had originally planned no longer quite sounds right, and so having multiple takes with multiple tones for the same lines can be hugely helpful.
Yeah.
But that's more time, that's more actor time, that's more recording time, that's more editing time, adds to the costs. So
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, I would say as well, like when going into any kind of project, you really want a director that knows the game really well and they
Mm,
have the whole vision of the game in their head. It's difficult because a lot of indie developers, while yes, you could technically be your own director, speaking to an actor isn't. I actually was talking about that someone with someone last night about this. It's not as daunting as you might think it is. But there are certain rules I think that you should follow when speaking to an actor if you want to try to direct your own game because you just don't have the budget to hire someone else.
yeah,
Um, First and foremost, I would say never give a line read because you're kind of taking away the point of someone acting.
yeah.
Um, it's more of describing the scene, giving them all the information that they could possibly want. So A lot we have a tool that we use called CDT, or Creative Dialogue Tools, in
Hmm.
our studio, and it's a our own tool basically that we use and that we've created. But we incorporate anything we can, from sound effects like birds flapping to like scares the main player so they get an idea of how frightened they need to be.
Hmm.
Scene images, any videos for like cutscenes so that they have distance and of like who they're talking to and that sort of
Hmm.
thing. And then also a huge thing is if you've recorded someone previously that's interacting with the person you're now recording now, um, we have a system where we can actually play back those previously recorded lines so that they're interacting in a way with someone that's already been in the studio and
Hmm.
recorded their lines. So it's not
Gotcha.
going off of nothing, right? So it's like having an audiobook versus what you read on the page. Everyone's going to
Mm.
read it a bit different. And
Mm.
so having someone's actual tone that they've read to work off of helps tremendously. So it helps it fit. It helps the actor work off of the other person in a more
Kind of
fluid way.
kind of makes me think about, like, would you get the director to do the first voice responder, as opposed to, because if you haven't got the first recording yet, is it helpful to have someone who's not going to be the final voice give a tone, or at least a starting point?
Yeah, that's a good question actually. We normally tend to book the main character, the person that has the most lines in the game. It
Yeah,
depends though if um we've had a project that, say for instance, the most talented person that we brought in isn't necessarily the main actor, they're the supporting
yeah.
actor. So we would bring them in first because they have the most experience on working with the game and they really know
Gotcha.
their character and that sort of thing. So they won't struggle as much. So it will help give support to the main character who
Mm.
maybe hasn't had as much voiceover
Mm.
acting work in the past. It's actually a really nice way to think about it. Is a lot of tools we use is around like how people would do improv. So the
Yeah.
whole point of improv is to support your other people. And so if you're more comfortable with improv,
Mm.
you are trying to support your teammate who maybe is less comfortable with
The
improv.
kind of whole yes and kind of mindset,
Yeah,
I'm guessing. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah, yeah. That makes
exactly.
sense. It's
Yeah.
interesting because I mean, the closest I've got, I think, to sort of doing that kind of stuff is we worked on the Rocky Horror Show game, which unfortunately didn't work out. That's life. But we got to do some choreography, and I am not a dancer. And I didn't think I knew as much about musicals that I did. I mean, I'm a big Rocky Horror fan for obvious reasons, but the person we had, Ruby, who was doing the choreography, happened to be, by complete coincidence, the girlfriend of the guy doing the art. Happened to be a dance teacher. We got her all strapped up with the ball bear, the ping pong
Yeah.
balls all over,
Yeah.
and it was amazing how, just by having a dialogue with somebody who had a reasonably good relationship with that, um, I could I knew emotionally what I wanted to get out to make the dances work, to make it feel like Rocky Horror. It worked, but if I didn't have that intimate kind of sense, I think it would have been quite difficult to be able to find ways of making that work. Particularly because I'm having to think, although I'm not technical, I'm having to think about the animation and how that matches not just the whole dance, but how we can break that dance into specific moves in the process. And I'm thinking about the parallels between dance and voice. It's still, expressive art form, and the idea of like being able to say, okay, I'm going to get somebody to say this kind of sentence, but I might need to be able to break that up and then reuse sections of that. So I might want specifically in my script to try to get numbers of variant ways of that person engage. I mean, am I talking nonsense? I mean, I'm thinking about this like creating flexibility in the way that you present the script. Do people do that, or is it just we do the script? It's what it is.
No, yeah, yeah, absolutely. It really depends on how people build their games. So it's actually a question where I feel like a lot of indie developers are really guarded on
Mm.
like the systems that they're using and that sort of thing, when actually it really helps us organize and plan for them.
Mm.
Um, is always a question that my one of my coworkers asks, because he's in charge of all the mastering and everything, and he they always get are very cagey about it. It's understandable because people don't want, with all the, stealing of ideas going about. I can understand, and like, this is your baby, so you don't want anyone
Yeah.
to harm it.
The trouble
But
is
then,
that that stuff is so. Yes, stealing of ideas happens, but generally it only happens when you're already making $100 million.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah,
I'm joking, but
no, it's
um,
true, yeah.
the sensitivity
But people are
is
always
great.
afraid of it, yeah,
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 yeah.
yeah.
So,
I get it.
yeah, but like we've had some people making a game, actually, uh, yeah, so some people making a game where the voice lines trigger one after another, and they
Mm.
have to be in sequence with each other. So we have to fit it in a certain time frame, which
Yeah.
kind of takes away from performance, but we do have to work with that.
But
Um,
equally, I find
the
that horrifying um, because I'm a big believer in letting the players direct things. I get really frustrated in games that make me do things in certain orders, and I
Yeah,
don't think I'm alone. Sorry, that's a completely unfair
no,
response. Sorry.
I'm in agreement as well. I tend to enjoy the games that let me help or let me dictate the flow of things. Like
Yeah,
you mentioned Baldur's Gate before. Baldur's
yeah,
Gate's a really good um example of that.
yeah.
Uh, and like point and click adventure games, they are on the low end of the spectrum on indie type stuff, but they are one of my favorite types of games to play. I just like the puzzles.
I
And
don't
then,
get me wrong. I did used to love them a long time ago, and obviously Monkey Island and all that kind of stuff. I tried to play Monkey Island not that long ago. Oh my god, I just can't do it. I literally can't think like that anymore. I just don't have it in me.
have
Um,
you played the Return to Monkey Island, the newest one
yeah,
that
well,
just came
that
out?
was what I was trying to play, and it
Wow.
just didn't work for my brain. It's what it is when that was the kind of the only kind of genre that did that sort of thing. In that era, you kind of learnt the pattern logic. It's a bit like if you're big into crossword puzzles, you work out the language of how the puzzles are set. And for me, I've got so away from that logic that it doesn't work. But you're right, there is something about the language, the kind of vocabulary, the characterization of that, which is absolutely special.
Yeah.
I do, I feel it. I just can't do it.
Yeah, totally understandable. I mean, that's why there's so many genres, isn't it? Like I
Yeah.
can't play roguelikes, for instance, just because I don't know. There's just something about them that
Whereas I
uh
love them.
yeah,
Well,
yeah.
actually, it's not true. Actually, what I love is smart innovations. Um, I'm the sort of person that you don't want to start a game with me because I'll trash you for the first 10 minutes, and then you'll trash me forevermore. I'm kind of I work out why a game works really really quickly, but then I'm never
Yeah,
going to master it. I'm just not that kind of brain. Um,
yeah,
but I think there's something about like thinking about what you do, and you mentioned Baldur's Gate and its strength there. So obviously that is Baldur's Gate 3 is a masterpiece of voice acting in every characteristic. There are a couple of areas where kind of maybe I felt the tone was a slightly kind of like janky, but they were so exception moments. They were just because I happened to come at that particular mission slightly differently than maybe somebody else would have done because of the order in which I did certain things.
yeah,
You can't fix that. That's inevitable. So
yeah.
the fact that I had so few of those moments to me shows the master work that went into understanding how that narrative should work.
Yeah, and it's I have to give it to I know quite I think all the directors that were on that game, they're really close friends of mine, especially
Oh
Nat Winters and
yeah,
Thomas Mitchell. Um, but yeah, I, I commend them for their work on
yeah,
helping, keeping everything very organized and very fluid. I have to say that I think now that I think about it, the idea of putting the game into kind of like an open beta playtest for
yeah,
everyone to give feedback and open feedback was quite an ingenious way to go about uh one, promoting their game, and two, making sure that all the dialogue kind of flowed together and kind of
Yeah.
fit in every different way. I'd be very interested to look at the back end on how the production pipeline worked for that game, because I can imagine it must have been such a head fuck.
But as a guy who basically lives in live ops land, I mean, essentially, I mean, it's not I never do product stuff. It's just that to me, that getting a game, whatever size, even hyper casual games, what was good about them is that we put them in front of players as early as possible, and what we do is we kind of find a way to restrict the audience exposed at any given time. And the more we're confident in the game, the more we expose. And I think, like you say, Baldur's Gate did a fantastic job of that. To my mind, that was the riskiest because of the scale of the brand, the amount of passion and love that already existed for that brand. Keeping a lid on the volume of players so you don't burn them out if there's
Yeah,
problems. Oh my goodness me, that's the bit that scares me most.
yeah,
But the other side of it, I think this is where you're hinting at, the volume of retakes and remakes and changes and the pace of that, the frequency of that. Wow,
yeah.
that's a challenge. Yeah,
Yeah, it was. And it's a really good thing that the game ended up being the game of the year and sold ridiculous amounts of
yeah.
copies, because I'm definitely sure that it recouped all those costs that went into that.
Oh, I
Um,
darn well hope so. But they were
yeah,
cost
yeah,
well worth spending from the point of view of the experience. I
absolutely.
think that's the key.
Yeah, absolutely.
But
Yeah.
we're not all making Baldur's Gate.
No.
And I think though it'd be interesting to sort of see what we are kind of roaming around a bit. So let's kind of try and trawl ourselves back. But I want to come back to this lessons from things like big games like Baldur's Gate because of their volume and scale. You could also argue Starfield as well, but that's again because there's the scale of increased use of voice in Starfield in that time was huge. But I would say not as successful for various reasons, mostly because of the game rather than the other thing. Although I enjoyed it tremendously as well. Um, but let's go back to our indies. Our indies have got their script. They know roughly what they want to do. They're going into the teams like yourselves, and they're saying, okay, we want these kind of people. Here are the character profiles. Here are the context. Here's some gameplay footage or concept art to work off. What happens next?
Yeah, so then we would go into casting, obviously. So we would find our actor, and
Hmm.
there's a few different ways you can go about this. We have something called our database,
Hmm.
full of just previous little tiny, like 8-second clips of things that people in the past that we feel are exemplary. We put what they've done, like the voices that they've done, into this database and kind of folder structure it based on each individual person, so that if a dev doesn't want to, because obviously live castings require a lot of time, um, they can just request, oh, I want to do a database casting and not pay for that. And so that we can like show them like, oh, yeah, so if this this is the character, we go into we like have probably have someone in mind, and we go into the database and we go, this voice sample kind of matches this character. We think that this person would be really good. What do you think? Kind of thing. Likewise with like live castings or submissions, you would get you would send out the brief, and then they send us the brief, and then we go through either database or the live casting. And if you do go down the paid route for the submissions, we send a bunch of submissions out to agents. It's very rare that we'll work with an actor directly. And so it's mostly agents that we go through. And then we just get loads of submissions back and we filter them through. And then we send what we think are the best ones to the developer, and then they can pick whoever they want. Uh, the alternate to all of this is that we've had sometimes in the past where people are doing demos and that sort of thing, and they just need a placeholder voice just to show to investors. to show that it would be more beneficial to put voice in the game. And so they would give us that kind of liberty to just pick whoever we want, hire them in and record. And if they don't like something, then we can change it after the fact.
Well, that kind of makes me
Um,
think about the context as well. So, for example, yes, we want the best voice for the job, but equally,
yeah,
sometimes the fact of a voice can add prestige to the game. And I mean, we're not always lucky as someone like Mike Bithell, who happened to be friends with Danny Wallace, and Danny Wallace did a fantastic, amazing job in terms of Thomas Was Alone, and the characterization of that, the fact of it being somebody relatively well known, especially now, and just the quality of their tone that made a relatively simple game transform it's not a simple game, you know what I mean, but
yeah,
I, I probably embarrass Mike on a regular basis because I still go back to the art of that game and how every component of it was beautifully thought through given its budget constraints and audience size. But
yeah,
we're not all Mikes of this world,
yeah.
and but I think there's something in that about understanding the role of the voice actor beyond just being the voice. Is that a big component for a lot of people?
Yeah, well, I feel like some roles are a lot more difficult to cast than others. And we always shoot for being finding the voice that makes you go, and my boss's words, fuck yeah. So, so whenever the
Yeah.
devs get
Okay.
the
Yeah.
voice, they're
Yeah.
like, fuck yes, this is who we want, kind of thing.
Yeah. 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 That's
And I've
good.
seen that countless times through different projects. And that's what we're shooting for. So I think
Mm,
if you can spend the money on doing a broad live casting or just submissions, I think that's more beneficial than doing
mm,
like database stuff and kind of, cutting corners on what you can save on, what you can't save on. I think that's very because, and any director will agree as well that if you do the casting correctly, the end result that you'll get during the recordings will be way simpler, way faster. You'll enjoy it way more.
mm,
Uh,
mm,
so I think the biggest thing that you want to spend money on is making sure you do the castings properly
mm.
and thoroughly and correctly, more than anything. I've seen people who've thrown like kind of like recorded on phone audio into their game. No one notices it because they cleaned it up fabulously.
Yeah, it could
But
happen.
the casting is on point. So
Yeah, again, it's getting the right. So again, I'm just thinking about the context of this. So I mean, obviously, with the critical roles of this world out there, we've seen a massive rise of voice actors starting to become like podcasts or real play game persons and so on and so forth, and they're therefore becoming kind of personalities in their own right, as opposed to the more traditional acting or the jobbing actor kind of path. Do you think that that's had an effect on the kind of people we're choosing as people we want to cast? Is it that you're getting somebody to say, I saw this person do that, can we get them? Or are you just going, let's try and get the right tonality based on the character more?
yeah, I think it really depends on what you want. I find that a lot of game developers, they'll pick celebrities, but
Mm,
celebrities might not necessarily be the best for the role. Um, Especially if like, oh, we really like this streamer, they're not an actor. So working with them in an acting sense is probably it's like you've seen it in like the basketball games of olden days as well, where you get these really stilted acting because they're
yeah.
they're basketball players, they're not actors. But
There was a
kind of
famous
similar,
Euro football song where certain participants were not exactly, well, best described as wooden.
yeah, yeah, exactly. So likewise with some celebrities who have done acting in the past, they can be. It really depends. It's kind of like a don't meet your heroes kind of thing in that regard. I've seen devs who are so excited to bring certain people onto projects, and the celebrity in question was just so fucking rude. Uh, and I'm not
Because
gonna,
they
obviously
just
not
don't
gonna
want to
name any
be there.
names, but I've seen it happen multiple times. But obviously the flip can happen as well, and they bring the character to life and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
My personal opinion is, especially for like some of the films even coming out recently, where they use like The Rock in these like big franchise like animated stuff. I think that if you overuse an actor just because of their personality, it really doesn't help anything unless that is legitimately what you're going for and it does work. I think that casting should always be on the forefront of your mind if it turns out it doesn't work. And I think recasting it
Yeah.
is definitely a good choice.
I think at the end of the day, it's like, are you trying to have a show about The Rock, or are you trying to have a character that's a bit like The Rock?
Yeah,
And is it the character you're trying to sell, or the actor? You know.
yeah, exactly.
So, okay, we've found our cast. We've gone through our various routes. We've got somebody either famous or not famous. We've got somebody who's got the right characterization, the right tonality. We might even have an actor who's got the vocal range to be able to handle multiple voice in the process. I've met a few voice actors in the past, and amazing how they can turn on a character and sustain that character. I wish I could sustain an accent. I can do loads of
Yeah.
accents. I can't sustain it. That's why I'll never be a voice actor. But so we've got our person who's going to do it. We're going to stick him in a room with presumably lots of soundproofing, on their own most of the time, I'm assuming.
Yeah, because you want the least kind of outside interference possible. Cleanup afterwards is going to be a nightmare if you have like construction going on in the background or something like that. Like
Mm.
home studios, for instance, that come to mind. They're great to get the job done if you're recording like a podcast or if you're in a really quiet area or if you've got a really, really good sound setup. But depending on the job in question, like for instance, if you have a really closed space and you have to yell, um, your yell will then become the sound of your room, and that might not necessarily sound the best. Or it's just speaking at a certain volume. I think really closed booths tend to work the best if you're
Mm.
talking at our voice level
Mm.
or whispering. Um, but yeah, so you stick them in the booth, and then we would have a director on the other side of the glass,
Mm.
preferably full line of sight, because I think one of the most important things for an actor is being able to read body language of
Mm.
whoever is working with them. It's another reason why actually that we support uh, in studio, in person recordings rather than online, just
Mm.
because body language is part of the human condition and it is so important, especially for the actor to feel really comfortable and confident in what they're doing.
Mm.
Um, and that's also why we support the developers coming into the physically into the session and
Mm.
rooms as well. So one, they have a good time and experience everything, all the magic of everything coming to life, but also so we know if we're doing our jobs correctly,
Mm.
because sometimes it's a funny thing where we will have our own vision of the game in question, but if that doesn't align, we want to talk about it and see that. And some people might trust the directors more than themselves at times, which is great if you're going, for more of the creative route. But if you need to stick your foot in to be like, no, this doesn't work. I'm sorry. I was thinking about it this way. Then I think that that's really important to do.
Mm.
As a game developer, to make sure that you're, because if you're especially if you're hiring an external director, they won't know the full vision of the game. They'll just be seeing words on a script, while as
Yep.
you'll be seeing all the art and music and scenes and everything coming to life and
All
what
the
your vision is
context.
for that scene. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Yeah,
Actually,
yeah.
I'm thinking about this booth thing. I was like, one thing, I mean, I think it's easy to underestimate if you change the environment that you're recording in, how much it affects the tone. Even changing the equipment that you're using to record can change tonality dramatically. And trying to, I was trying to do some Kickstarter kind of videos and trying to find ways to get, recordings for people, sometimes outside, sometimes inside, and trying to make that work. The amount of effort it took to try and make that not look terrible, or not sound terrible. wow, that was. I mean,
Yeah.
that consistency, I think, is a lot. Is really poignant. And like you say, being able to go in and have that face-to-face contact when that person is performing, to be able to have that response, and like you say, knowing your skill set, not trying to be the director if you're not got that talent, but knowing that you do know the game, and that's okay.
Yeah.
I kind of think for me, it always comes down to some of the best stuff happens when you've got people who've got opinions firmly felt but loosely held. So, where we can have
Yes.
an argument about whether that should be there or not, but not make that a personal thing, that make that something where it's about pushing ourselves to find the right, in this case, performance. Um,
Yes.
yeah.
That's why I think got a lot go with the whole idea of AI coming out more and more.
Mm,
That's just one of the things that I will argue to my deathbed is that the more people, while there can be the concept of too many cooks in the kitchen,
yeah.
there is a sweet spot of having enough people to collaborate on a project,
Yeah.
and throw ideas out that maybe you've not thought of. Like, for
Mm,
instance, an actor rather than an AI will bring something to the table that you yourself haven't thought of.
yeah.
So they'll interpret a scene maybe a bit differently or maybe more emotionally, and then that'll you'll be sitting there, sitting seeing the scene play out, and it'll hit you way harder than
Yeah.
you originally envisioned it. And so that's where the idea of the whole like fuck yes comes from as
Yeah,
well. So
exactly.
yeah,
Make me cry. I mean, yeah.
yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
it's interesting because I think that the AI thing is massively interesting, but we have at the moment. Don't get me wrong, it's come hugely, but it's not AI at all. It's just prediction. I say
Yeah.
just. It's incredible prediction, but what I think it means is that we're underestimating the equivalent of an uncanny valley, where kind of it will get us so far, but it can't get us beyond that. And also, frankly, if it's machine created, we don't own it. It's not copyrightable. Oh, we
Yeah.
might own it, but it's not copyrightable. Whereas a voice acted piece can be copyrightable, and I think that's an kind of important part. But at the same time, I think finding ways to utilize AI can unlock potentials for new things we can do in games that you couldn't have done otherwise. I mean, so for example, having a core material produced by the actor, having a number of phrases created that can then be utilized by a smart AI and voiced by that actor essentially from that automated process, that could be amazing. We could have a proper conversation. For example, a team that I've been working with called Adam Universe or Adam Stars, they built a kind of AI using, I think, Henry Ford. So Henry Ford's mindset, an avatar in full 3D using MetaHuman, so it looked fairly realistic, and I could have a conversation with Henry Ford about why it was important to pay workers, enough so they could afford the things they buy. Which I know happens to be an actual thing that he talked about, and
Yeah.
the fact that the AI could respond to me was really interesting. Now, because there's no performance in that, but if you
Yeah.
could get that performance somehow by combining the skills of the actor and some logic, that to me sounds like a massively wonderful, exciting area. So I suppose the reason I'm going into that is because I'm trying to show that it doesn't have to all be bad to use AI,
No, for
but
sure. Yeah.
it's that finding that line, isn't it?
Yeah. I think something that people have mentioned countless times to me, and which I agree with as well, is that a lot of especially the new AI that
Mm,
has come about, will probably mostly be the really repetitive and, quite frankly, kind of boring part of any actor's job in directing,
mm,
is just doing the barks. So,
yeah,
because sometimes it's just you could have an hour's worth of barks to get through, and all it is go over there, no, here, get this, get that, do this kind of
get away
thing.
from him.
Because that's, so like in
Yeah,
like a war, like in Call of Duty, or that kind of game setting, you want those little bits to make the whole project kind of come to life, but you don't necessarily need to have a ton of passion, or there's it's not very intense emotion. They're little blips that happen that
Yeah.
you just hear out of the it was like the Wilhelm scream, for instance, where it adds a little something, but if you focus on it too much, you're like, hold on a sec, that doesn't really sound great.
But the
Um,
Willem Scream has got so many layers about
it does.
irony
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
can you find it? Especially
Yeah.
when it's been used in. Hasn't it been used in some sort of sci-fi as like the engine sound, but no one's quite worked it out until the
Yeah.
much later. So
Yeah.
anyway, I love all
But
that stuff. Yeah.
yeah, I love I going off on a little tangent here, but I learned recently that when they were recording that specific Wilhelm scream, they also have recorded a bunch of other screams as well. But for some reason, that one take is a thing that everyone uses, even though he's got many like
Everyone,
countless other
yeah.
ones. Yeah. So,
Yeah, exactly. So, I mean, let's go back to our plot. So, in terms of driving the kind of chain forward, we've got a script, we've got our cast, we've got the person in the booth, we're having an interaction between the director and the actor. We've now
mm.
captured a mass of footage, hours of footage potentially. Um, Actually, before we go beyond that, you know, what is the typical duration you're going to have an actor in the room, and how do you keep their energy and consistency up?
Yeah, so that's a really good question, actually. It could vary. Really depends on how big the project is
Mm,
and how many characters that actor is doing. One other tip, if you're a developer and wanting to cast many different roles, not every single role has to be a different person. It could be
mm,
a very versatile actor doing many different roles. It'll really save you a lot of, um, money doing it that way.
mm.
And then you get to know the actor more, and they, will help bring everything to life more because they understand the whole context of the game that you're working with more. As for keeping their energy up, I would say that breaks are really important, as with any job. Uh, there's no one person that could, scream for over an hour constantly, or um, people who, whenever you're just even at a desk job, you have to take breaks, you have to stand up, you have to stretch, you have to just relax your body,
You haven't heard
have a
me
cup
at a
of
heavy
tea.
metal concert.
Obviously not. Be very impressed. um, but yeah, so those types of things are how you keep an actor's energy up. That also goes with people who have a lot of experience doing this sort of thing. They will we have this one guy in particular, actually, who's quite funny. He will uh consistently have one volume of his voice.
Mm.
He will take a break, and he will, for some reason, just it'll be notched down just like a tiny bit, but he will then sustain in that new region through the whole rest until the next break. And so, like, it some people are just very, very talented at being able to lock in, as you said,
Mm.
to that specific thing that they're doing and sustain it for hours just because they've
Mm.
done it for so long. It just comes very naturally to them, and they
Oh,
don't
I've
even have to
seen it.
think about it.
I remember I was interviewing, I won't say who it was, but a developer, talented female developer, and she gave a kind of breakdown on the script, and we realised that the recording wasn't working. So we started again, and she was literally point perfect, word perfect, and it wasn't scripted. She just said exactly the same thing perfectly. Even when I've done Amdram stuff and I've got a script and I've learnt it, I've never been on pitch like that. I do not understand how a human being can do it.
Yeah,
But there are folks out there who are just incredible like that and just
yeah,
know that sort of control, which is sort of exceptional. What's the
yeah.
other thing I was going to say on that? I think one of the other things that's worth kind of I'm intrigued by. Now, I'm assuming that when you have a single actor doing multiple parts, you always have them do one part, then stop, and then the next part, and then stop. Are there individuals who do the whole conversation themselves, or is that just completely nonsense?
Uh, we have actually had similar things, like for instance, Mike gets a little, maybe a little bit of hate with saying this. Hopefully not. Please don't. I'm just the person that worked on this. But we did do the game Gollum, which got a lot of really negative press. But the
Yeah.
acting in it, we really enjoyed. It was probably one of our most favorite projects to work with. And the actor who was doing Gollum also obviously had to do Smeagol. And so that was a very rare instance of this, but we
Mm,
had them playing off of each other because it's how, Smeagol and Gollum interacted in like the movies as well,
mm,
right? And he kind of was able to do that. Some people
mm,
can't. He was able to switch from one person to the
mm,
next, and kind of keep very consistent.
mm,
But yeah, most of the time it would need to be you do one character and then the next character if they're interacting in a
mm,
specific scene together. Most of the time, though, we try to steer clear, unless it's very, very, very different, of
mm.
an actor being in the same scene as themselves and talking to themselves, just because, at least for me, if it was someone like me, maybe not someone else who isn't in this line of work, I'd be able to spot that instantly just because I'm really good at spotting voices now. Um, but
Yeah,
yeah, so we try to steer clear of even, people who aren't
yeah.
in this line of work
They'd
being
have
able
to
to
be
tell that.
super talented, I'm guessing, if they to
Yeah,
pull that off. Yeah,
exactly.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
Not everyone's Tom Hanks who can perform 50 different characters in one movie.
Yeah,
I've
exactly.
noticed.
Well, I
Yeah.
hadn't realised that it was his brother that plays Woody in some of the other content, rather than
Oh, really?
yeah,
I
yeah,
didn't
yeah.
know that.
So in
Ah,
some of the spin-offs,
right.
it's actually Tom Hanks's brother who plays it. It was, I mean, just I find that fascinating. Um,
Yeah.
anyway, um, so we've got the actor. We've taken them through the process. We've got our set of material. We've matched that to the script. Presumably you've got some kind of way of recording. And now, how I mean, this is the I think the thing that's also important is matching and knowing how to find that material once it's recorded. How do you do that bit? Because you've got masses of lines. I need to know go to a specific line at a specific time
Yeah.
and merge it into the game. How do you break that up and make that trackable?
Yeah. So, file names would be the short answer to that. You always have file names for everything and tied to the script. And I know a lot of different studios are kind of doing something similar to us, but in terms of what we do, is we send it off to our editors who then chop it up very quickly. So none of it's been cleaned, it's very raw. And then we have a folder structure and our tool that then looks at that folder structure and says, okay, this line says this is the file name, and that's the character. Go look at where that file name and character folder is and play that line, play that
Mm.
audio file. And so then we can then play back what we had even just recorded, like in the previous hour, to the next actor who's just come in to record new content.
So just for my context is you're starting and stopping the recording for each line, or are you recording throughout and then cutting it and slicing it down with the metadata?
Yeah, so different studios do different things. Some studios that I'm aware of, they do actually stop and start per line, and then they save it out in a batch, and then send it off to editors, and then it can be played back whatsoever. What we do is we kind of we record one large file, usually about like 10 minutes long, to
Mm.
be sent to our editors, who then chop it up
Yeah.
and send it back to us. And then we remove like all the fluff out of it. So because as like any fluff takes, or if there has to be some kind of discussion on a line, we remove all that kind of stuff.
The ums and the ahs and the coughs and all that kind of stuff.
Yep. Yep.
So
Yep.
now we've got a whole bunch of assets, a whole bunch of elements on it. They're all
Yep.
mapped against particular points in the script. What about localization? Because presumably we're not just doing this in English all the time. We need the Russian, the Japanese, the French, the German, and presumably they're going to be different durations. And does the script have to change dramatically? I know when we're looking at localization files in terms of text, we have to think about where it fits into the text boxes and so on and so forth, and how that maps out. Do you have similar problems with the voice?
So we've been most of the time we are on we record first and then localization happens later
Yeah,
because
yeah.
English is king. But other times, depending on the project, we have like Japanese projects, for instance, they tend to record in Japanese first, and then they give us a time constraints on how long the sentence can be. character wise if we do need to change stuff, because as I'm sure that you're aware, every language doesn't mean the same thing just by Google translating it. Different phrases mean different
Who knew?
things. So yeah, things do have to change in another language if you want it to be able to make sense to the native, speaker. So we unfortunately don't have the capability to do localization on our end, but we do have many partners around the world that will that we work with. So we send them because we trust them. They produce really good work for us in the past. Hey, this is the script that needs to be localized to German or French or Italian or
Yeah.
Japanese. Um, and usually the developers will have had someone translate it. But if they haven't, then we can, of course, find those people who we trust and have worked with in the past to
And
translate,
and I
and
think
so on
that's
and so
pretty
forth.
normal. I mean, like I say, I'm just raising it because anyone who's listening to this, if they've not done this process before, understanding that kind of like you're going to lay a line in the sand, you're going to get that right, and and actually the complications of localization are less are not just about like translating, like you say, the Google Translate problem, but it's also like the say the amount of time that's spent and the animations that are associated with that. And obviously, a lot of the animations that we'll do will be voice sync to the recording, right? To
Yeah.
tagged to the recording rather than fixed animations nowadays. At least that's my understanding. Like I say, I don't do this very often. But the paying attention to how much time you've got, how much time it's going to take, and that will obviously affect the translation that you particularly apply and the editing that you apply to that translation as well. It's a massive art form to try to pull together in itself. I think that whole process.
Yeah,
Um,
that's why I think a lot of developers tend to record just one language, or like for instance, Blasphemous, they only have their Spanish side and the English side.
yeah.
Um, that's because the undertaking of translation is just massive, a massive job for sure.
Or you go the Sims route and use Simlish, so you're making nonsense sound. Well, it's as I understand, it's slightly based on Finnish, because well, it sounds like Finnish anyway to me, and that, but that kind of logic is very sensible. But you're still going to record it or find a way to capture it.
Yeah,
Especially if you want to try and
yeah,
generate emotions. I'm pretty sure there's a script there, but I don't know. I'm not a.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and this
So
is where oh, sorry, I was just gonna say this is where I think that AI really comes into play to help developers, because if you have to record those barks, for instance, not only in one language but in multiple languages, the amount of time and money spent will decrease dramatically. Yeah.
Like I say, I think at this point now we've got our file, it's tagged up, it's got the thing, we've talked about localization. So essentially, that kind of voice capture has been done, it's been integrated into the game, managed accordingly. I think there'll presumably be how would would you how many resits would you expect to have in a typical game, or do you find that games don't necessarily need to worry too much about resitting,
Resetting in terms of
as in
seeing
getting
how
the
it works
actor
in the
back
game.
to add in extra lines?
Right, right. It often doesn't happen, just because we're so good now. It's, most of the people that we work with are indie developers, which is why whenever I mentioned Baldur's Gate 3 earlier, like the massive undertaking of going through not only making sure everything fit together, but also most games out there are very linear. They don't have a bunch of branching paths, different conditions that you can work with. The script, I just desperately want to take a look at that master script to know what the fuck it looks like, because I can't even picture it, how like you would go about doing that without obviously
I don't think
having
there's
to do
one
it.
master script. I think there are dozens. Yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely, absolutely, based on probably each act, I would say. um
Each
but
character in each act, I suspect, as well. So
Yeah,
yeah.
that's very true. Yeah, but yeah, so most developers are pretty clear on what they're going to be using, and it's very rare actually that we'll find a developer who's not already finished what they really want to record. And have to then come back to us to be like, hey, we missed something. Hey, we want to add something. But it does happen for sure.
Mm,
I would say probably maybe 25% of the time, maybe
mm,
20% of the time, a developer will come back and be like, hey, we want to change this line. We don't think it's working. Or,
mm.
um, yeah,
But it does show that there are some advantages in doing it late, but obviously there are
yeah,
risks associated with that as well. So I mean,
yeah.
I think in short, I think we've taken our listeners on a journey of all of the elements that I can think of that are required in this. Is there anything we've missed? Any sort of last thing you'd like people to take away from this process?
Yeah, the last bit actually is what happens with it after it's recorded and
Mm,
edited and done with. Obviously, cleanup is a really important part of any kind of recording because people, how they talk and how we listen to them and how our ears work is a lot different to what maybe a mic will pick up on a
mm,
voice actor's voice. And unlike talking with you and me or with a normal person who's standing a couple feet away from you, the voice is being directed into your ears if you're on a computer or not, I guess, if you're
mm,
sitting on a TV, but still how the speakers react to a voice and like clicks and pops that are just naturally in people's voices will just be exaggerated, especially if you're mastering it and you have to then put a lot of, compression or limitations, and some people even normalize their voice
mm,
recordings to put in game. Some things that you normally wouldn't hear in a voice tend to stand out a lot. So cleaning is definitely very important
mm,
in any process, and some games are cleaner than others. It just depends on the type of game. Like I think with like Dark Tide, for instance, everyone's shouting. There's tons of guns happening all over the place, so you won't really hear those
no.
things pop out nearly as much as a very interactive game like I don't know, like Alan Wake, where you're everything's quiet and you're just listening to the narrator or
Mm,
the person you're playing speak. Um, um, yeah, basically knowing what you want to put in engine at the very end of the
mm,
day, how you want it to sound, is very important, just
mm.
as much as casting, because you want the player not to um, be kind of bombarded by something that's unpleasant to listen to.
Yeah, and a lot of that will obviously come down to having as clean a recording as possible, so that when the audio dev or the audio engineer that's making the final game experience work, has that kind of soundscape that makes sense of the context of the game. So,
Yeah,
whether using 3D audio technology, so you kind of know positionally where somebody is at any point, how that audio might reflect in certain environments, all of those things about it's an infinite level of detail, I suspect, that people could go into.
yeah,
And that reminds me about the joy of mobile games, where um, you know more than 50% of people will just turn the audio off, and it's like, that doesn't mean it's not important, though. I mean, I don't want to underestimate. I mean, I think it's hugely important,
yeah,
but it is interesting how, for all of that beauty and that talent that goes into that, the number of times we sit there with a second screen running, or something like Spotify in the background, or a podcast running in the background. Maybe you're listening to Game Dev London talking about making games while playing the game, and obviously the human ear can't hold all of that stuff
yeah,
at once.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. But
Well.
yeah. So another thing I wanted to mention as well. So it ties into the really stuff that stands out. Sometimes your unconscious brain will actually pick up on things that you're like, this makes me uncomfortable, and I don't understand why it's making you uncomfortable. One thing for me in particular that I get annoyed with is very sibilant S's. Some people, for
Mm,
some reason, they just have like a whistle that comes out in their S's.
Sibiance.
Yeah.
Sounds like steam is skipping.
Yeah. And then very plosive like P's or D's
Mm,
or B's or P's, that sort of thing.
yeah.
Actually, one of the things for all it's done right, Baldur's Gate is like one of the worst games that I've experienced where plosives were not, I think, taken into consideration.
Fair.
Maybe that's due to the mastering process. I'm
Mhm.
not particularly sure, but I have noticed that it's a big thing in Baldur's Gate more so than any other game. So I tend to listen to it on not great headphones because it makes the experience a bit more enjoyable for me, and not on
Uh,
my hi-fi system, you know.
Fair
Um,
enough. Fair enough. Hey, I
yeah,
don't have the. I mean, I don't notice the benefit of high quality speakers. Like, I mean, some people can pick up a pin drop, and
yeah.
yeah, sure, it sounds good to me. Um,
You'll definitely notice it if you listen. It's like having a routine and then all of a sudden that routine changes slightly. So if you listen to it for a long, 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 long time, even if like even if you're not an audiophile, for instance, if you switch to a worse system, you'll be like, this doesn't sound that good. Why does this not sound that good?
yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah.
No, I feel that. Yeah. Well, I think we're out of time, unfortunately. That has been fantastic. Thank you for taking us on that journey. I think I've learned a lot
Absolutely.
more about the process, as a direct result, and hopefully the listener, have gained something from that. If you've enjoyed this, then please, like, subscribe, and do all those usual things. Why not come and join us in the Game Dev London Discord group and carry on the conversation there, and tell us what you'd like to know, because obviously we've got a whole bunch of talented people like Ronnie here who understands the making of games, throughout the community, and I'm sure there'll be people out there who'll be more than willing to help you. So, Ronnie, thank you again for joining. Is there what's the best way if people wanted to get hold of you or talk to you, or what are you planning to do next in terms of, because you're a GDL podcast host too? What are you planning to do next yourself?
Yeah, so you can find me on any social media platform by doing putting in my tag. I think I put it in the name in my name. That'll
It's
pop
been
up
popping up.
occasionally.
Yeah, I'll make it pop up
Yeah.
now as well.
And then otherwise, my plans to help out with GDL is I really want to make the in-person meetups happen more frequently. Those are my favorite part of any kind of game dev social stuff that goes on. And yeah, helping possibly even with Twitch streams. So maybe you'll see me on the Twitch
Ooh. Ooh.
channel. So we'll see. Yeah.
Sounds exciting. Well, thank you very much for that. And thank you all for listening. And as we get to the end, I have to say the final phrase. This has been your Game Dev London podcast. Like, subscribe, and all the other stuff, as I said before. And we'll be back again with more discussions on making games.